Hey everybody, welcome to the Pesty podcast. Today we are talking about 5 KPIs to dominate your market. First, I'm going to introduce our guest and let him give a little bit of a background on him. Adam Weber ran a successful pest control company for 10 years and eventually sold that company actually out in my neck of the woods in Texas before founding Driven. Adam, can you give us a quick rundown of kind of your experience in the industry, how you scaled the company, proxy of size you guys got to, and then also give us some background about Driven and what you're up to today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and thank you, Ender, for having me on the show. Big fan and love to share a little bit of that. So to give you kind of a quick rundown, I was not a pest control guy. That was never my plan or my vision. I was in the startup space. I was actually living in San Francisco at the time. This was 2012, and like 40th floor of a building downtown San Francisco, living the tech startup life, and thought that was the path for me. And out of the blue, I got a call from a good friend of mine who had been in the pest control space for some time. He was actually on the door knocking side, and he called and said, "Hey, I think there's more of an opportunity here than I gave it credit for. What do you think about coming to start a pest control company with me?" He's like, I know the sales side of it because that's the space that he came from. And he knew that I was in startups and in operations. And so he said, how to run a business. So maybe we can join forces and do this. And I got off the phone and almost immediately it just felt right, even though I was in the midst of fundraising for another business. And within a week, I had sold my lease to the apartment in San Francisco and had moved to El Paso, Texas, of all places. So there's a little bit of side story there, but that was to avoid a non-compete that he had with another company. So moved out to El Paso with this dream of starting a pest control company. And while he had come from the door-to-door space, we knew pretty early on that wasn't plan, right? That wasn't the path for us. And there's nothing against those. I now have a bunch of clients that are in the door-to-door space, but it just felt like for us, it wasn't going to be the path that we wanted to pursue. So that being said, the one caveat to that was we knew we needed to get a jump start into the business. We had families to provide for and all these things, that were going. And so the first summer, he did go sell door to door, just him. I came into it from operations, but operations from that size means nothing, right? So it's literally just him and I. So I actually became our first technician, zero experience, got my license under a certified applicator in Texas. Anyways, long story short, I was way underqualified for the role that I was in, but I was actually treating homes for the first summer, learning on the fly a little bit. And yeah, we launched from there. And I could spend hours and days going through some of the experiences that we went through, highs and lows for sure, actual blood, sweat, and tears. People say those terms a lot, but for us, it was real. I remember putting in the floor in our brand new office, like hardwood flooring, and just ripping my hands up, bleeding all the place. I think I left a little smudge on the wall to leave a mark for us. But anyways, we built the business over those first couple years. If I'm being totally honest, I say that we operated for 10 years, and that might be a little bit of a fudge of the truth, because after we got to a point where we had scaled a little bit, we were probably $600,000-700,000 a year. I felt like I wanted to take a different direction. And so we kept the business, but I jumped into some other ventures. We ended up buying a bunch of dental practices in Arizona, started a few other companies. The pest control business just kept operating. That was Fulcrum in Texas. And after a while of doing some other things, I took a look at myself and I'm like, I have this business that we grew, I hate to say relatively easily, but we grew it with the right path and it was growing healthy. And so I said, why am I doing all these other things? Why am I focusing in so many other places? And so, 2 or 3 years away, and then I came back to the business and jumped back in as a CEO role. And so at that point we said, hey, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. And so we started trying to understand the business, really why it was doing the things it was doing, what it meant to grow. We built some really incredible partner relationships that ended up helping us. Maybe in hindsight, it wasn't the best choice, but helping us expand into some other markets. So we opened an office in San Antonio, Austin, up where you're at, and then Dallas, and then ultimately an East Texas office at Marshall, Tyler, Longview area. But all of those expansions came because of a partner relationship. So a major piece of our growth actually came through having relationships with home inspectors. Those home inspectors that didn't perform the actual termite inspections, WDIs in Texas, would want to refer to a partner that could do it. And so we started building relationships with them, and it expanded our business really, really dramatically and pretty quickly. And it was a cool opportunity for us to expand into a new market because we could go to a new place and immediately have 3 to 10 WDIs per day coming from these home inspectors from pre-built relationships. And so it was an immediate cost offset, and it was just a cool way for us to grow. So ultimately we did that. But coming back to that thought of trying to understand our business, for the first 7 years, I hate to admit this, but honestly, I thought what success was more money in my bank account than I had at the beginning of the month, right? In the business, which is cool. And that's a good number to have. And you want that to a certain extent. But I didn't understand any of what went into it. So I started to pick that apart. I started to pull all of the data from all of these resources that we had. I thought I was really tech savvy and tech forward. And so I'm using all the tools that are available, from GPS monitoring, obviously the CRM, review collection, phone systems, all of these pieces that add to the cool puzzle that is a pest control company. I was using them. And so I wanted to understand what was happening within those tools. And so I found myself committing 5 to 10 hours a week just in pulling data. I would be sitting at my computer, typing away, trying to pull all these reports and understand what's happening. And I loved what I found. And so that was really cool for me. But I realized pretty early on that my time should be spent on changing those numbers, right? Making that data better and acting on that data. And I just wasn't, because I didn't have time. I had all the other, leadership responsibilities of running my team and pulling this data. And so we started realizing that there must be a tool out there that could do this. And we looked and we looked and we looked and we realized that it just wasn't, especially not at the time. And so we started building a very archaic, terrible version of what is now Driven. And we'll jump into that in a little bit, but it was basically a data collection tool that pulled it all into one place so that we could see it automatically. And so we started to do that. And to cut a long story short, we ended up realizing that it was something pretty special, something that could not only change our business, but change other businesses down the road. And so we started to have that conversation about, okay, we realized we didn't like doing 2 things at once, or 3 things, or 4 things at once. And so which could really have the most impact on not only us and our lives, but also on other people. And the answer kept coming back to us like, this is that opportunity. And so we took that chance and ended up finding a buyer for our pest control company, Truly Nolan out of Florida. They were an incredible partner. I had an opportunity to hang out with Scarlett a little bit last week, and they're just an incredible company. The way that they operate, the way that they take care of their staff and their team really just meshed well with us. And so we ended up selling the business to them. That was December of 22, 23. The time flies now, somewhere in there. And yeah, it was an incredible opportunity, and it kind of put us in the position to jump into what we're doing now at Driven. And so to give you some kind of context, at that point, our largest office was generating about $1.5 million a year. So we weren't massive by any stretch of the imagination, but at the same time, we had gotten to the point where we had scaled through some of those issues that a lot of operators have, and got to the point where we were seeing some cool growth, but also some of those hurdles and things that the operators go through, when you're at that stage. You asked what we're doing now. Driven is the culmination of that concept. And so we are much more sophisticated than what we were, but at its core, what we are is a KPI dashboard for every individual within an organization. So we pull all that data, like I was talking about, from all of those different sources. And then what we found is that data is really cool and valuable for me and them as operators. But what really changes the business is when we can take that data and put it in the hands of the people that, if we're being totally honest, they're the ones that really impact the business. And those are the technicians, the CSRs, the sales staff. And so that's what we do. We feed it down to that end user so that they can see how they're performing, see what's expected of them, and then also just change their behaviors. Because historically, they get that data in a performance review maybe once a month if company's awesome, maybe once a quarter, sometimes once a year, we're finding. And so by feeding that to them in real time, they can now look at it and say, hey, this is what's expected of me, and this is where I'm performing. So I've got to change my behaviors day by day. And we're finding some really cool things and have access to some insane amounts of data, because we're working with some really cool clients now where we can see, hey, this really works. This really changes the business. And I know that's a pat on the back a little bit, but we also just love the concept of being able to say, hey, this company grew by 1-2%, or they saved 1-2% month over month, because we're allowing them to see things that otherwise have been pretty tough for them to see.
Startup culture like 101, right? Scratch your own itch. You have a problem, figure out how to solve it, and then you find a way to distribute it and monetize it. And you coming from the tech world, I imagine that wasn't probably too scary, right? Like you'd kind of already been in that world. You maybe had a rough idea of what the path was going to look like. Are you a developer by trade?
No, not even close. Yeah. I have an incredible CTO now. And actually my business partner in Fulcrum taught himself to code. So he's a kind of quasi software engineer. And so he built the first version of what is now Driven. But now we've got much more qualified people that are helping to build it.
So just to share with everyone a concept that I have found very valuable, and Adam, I know you're going to know this concept. The first iteration of what Adam launched with Driven would be known as an MVP, or minimum viable product. And the way Adam and his partner did it, which was, I think you referred to it as archaic, right? Like you kind of want to ship something that, you do want to ship something that is not perfect, but that is good enough to help you start to get the job done. At Pesty, I use the term MVP all the time. We're not shipping software, but anytime that we need to create a new SOP, anytime that we have a new project we're taking on, I built a no-code application called What Kind of Bug Is This?, where you can take a picture of a bug and you get feedback about what that bug is using the OpenAI API, right? And so if you're listening to this and you're thinking, Adam, like that makes sense that Adam and his partner went and built it. They kind of had tech backgrounds, Bay Area, but it's not that you jump into it knowing exactly what the end product is going to look like, nor do you need to know all the answers. You just need to be high agency and resourceful enough that you're going to kind of figure it out along the way. And the MVP model, I think, is a really helpful framework to make things that seem big and scary not so big and scary, because you just have to start somewhere.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with that. And to address that a little bit, like I didn't really have that experience, right? Like I thought I was in it, but I really wasn't. And I have people come to me all the time, and I'm sure every, owner operator gets this a lot. Like people come and they're like, oh, you're an entrepreneur. I have this idea, or I want to do this, or I want to do that, or it's so cool, or oh, I could never take that risk and do what you do. But at the end of the day, what makes us different, makes us owners, makes us founders, makes us self-appointed CEOs, whatever that is just that action, right? Take action, do something with what you have. And the original version of what is now Driven is not even close to what we do. Even the concept, we thought the core of it was something totally different than what it does now, but we jumped in and we figured it out. And this is a side note, but I'm a huge advocate of the lean methodology. It's worth looking up if any listeners haven't checked into that. But it's a very test-based concept, right? It doesn't, parts of it mean lean by like staying lean and minimizing your costs, but also a big part of it is validation. And so we didn't just jump into this and we're like, we have the best idea, we're going to pursue it. We jumped into it and said, hey, we think this is a cool concept. It worked for us. What do other people think? And so we immediately went out and tested with people who are now very close friends, and some of them are advisors on my board, to be able to go in and say, hey, what do you think of this? What does it do for your business? And does it add value? And so by the time we were even remotely close to launching a live product, we knew what value it had, because we had gone and tested and questioned so much. So yeah, I'm just a big advocate for action. If you have an idea, if you want to do something, just jump into it and try it. And there's never going to be less risk than there is today. Like it just doesn't work that way. There's always going to be down the road, it will be easier, down the road, it will be better, but it doesn't work like that. Just jump in and try it.
Our clients are clients who have done at least $1 million per year in revenue. And this audience is going to be a lot of those people, as well as operators who are smaller, but just realize that if you can start a pest control business, you can build a company. Like you can build a product, you can build technology, because all it is solving problems. All it is believing in yourself enough that you will figure it out along the way,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no like pigeonholed into one industry. Like people ask me that a lot. Like the first company I started was a clothing company, second was in tech, third was in pest, fourth was in dentistry, and fifth is in tech. So it's all over the place. It really is just when you start to understand how people work and why people do the things that they do, then really you can do anything.
Absolutely. I talk to my team a lot about a term called self-efficacy, agency, and believing you're going to figure it out. Because if you don't even believe you can figure it out, you're not even going to try. You're not even going to start. As long as you can think clearly and you can communicate clearly, which means you can get the right people on board to help you figure it out, there's no reason you're not going to be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
So I've taken us a little bit astray here, but I got really excited, talking about tech, because I love that world. And obviously with Driven, highly related related, but let me bring us back to the main topic we're here to cover today. And again, as a reminder, we are here to discuss the 5 KPIs that will help you dominate your market. And so I want to start with that term, KPIs, key performance indicators, which I think for some listeners could sound like just a buzzword, right? Like if you don't really understand what that is. So help me understand, why do you think tracking KPIs is so crucial for pest control companies, especially those aiming to scale?
Yeah, you're right on the money. It is a buzzword right now. And I hate that it's a buzzword because I'll have people come up to us and be like, oh no, we don't need to track KPIs. I'm like, I'm sorry, but the concept of KPIs is just what your business is doing. Like that's it. It's just a word that describes how successful you are and where you want to find success. So there's all kinds of KPIs, right? Like every business has them, but they are essentially just how well you're doing at your job. They could be business KPIs, they could be individual performance KPIs, whatever it is. It's just the data that makes up how successful you are at what you do. I hate to like even harp on that because it's just like, of course you want to look at KPIs. Like everybody does, whether you realize it or not. My KPI when I started was, does my bank account have more money than it did at the beginning of the month? And that's still a KPI. It's a terrible one, but it's a KPI nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, if they're saying that they don't need to track KPIs, revenue is a KPI, profit is a KPI. All the numbers that you track in your business are KPIs. Now, which numbers you need to prioritize, depending on where the business is, which numbers you need to double click on and improve, depending on the needs of the business, that is, of course, what we're here today to discuss, right? Because if I've just enlightened you with the fact that all these numbers in your business are KPIs, now it's a matter of, crap, this is overwhelming. What do I even pay attention to? So before we jump into the first KPI, what common mistakes do pest control operators make when it comes to tracking or utilizing data?
Yeah, the answer to this might not be what you were looking for, but I'm going to share it anyways. I think the biggest mistake they make is just not tracking. I think it's not an issue of like finding the correct data. And sometimes that is, and the CRMs are a little bit difficult to work with in certain scenarios to find the right data, but it's really just a willingness to look at it. That's really where I see a big differentiator in really successful operators and not quite as successful operators, is just a willingness to actually go down that road and look for the information, because it's there. Unless you're working on note cards, which some people are still, and no judgment, it's worked for a long time, but unless you're working in those systems, the data is available to you. So it's just whether you're really willing to look for it, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I've built up enough about this. So guys, let's jump into the first KPI, and that would be callback rate by tech. Identify each of these KPIs. I'm going to ask Adam a few questions. And so here we are going to start with understanding the callback rate. Can you explain what it is and why it's a critical metric for pest control companies to monitor?
Yeah, absolutely. And one quick clarification. The metrics that I recommended, when you and I talked before this, they all focus on individual performance. None of my KPIs that I'm going to focus on today are EBITDA, or profit or revenue or those top line metrics. Those are obviously really important to understand and to look at. Obviously, because of what I do, I'm going to be a little bit jaded towards this, but I'm a huge believer that those individual performance metrics are what change the business. They're the ones that make those other metrics important. They're the ones that make those other metrics, valuable to you. And so if you can focus on the ground level, those other things will change. That's a quick caveat to your question. But to answer your actual question, what callback rate is, and I say this to a lot of my clients that we work with, is the way that callback rate has been looked at by the CRMs, and I love all of them, so this is not a knock on them, but has traditionally been pretty off. I don't know a single client that goes into their CRM, looks at the callback rate report, and knows that it's right every single time, because there's just some unique variances. And so at its core, callback rate is, did you have to go back to solve a problem you should have solved in the first place? That's really it. If it's a new problem, it's not a callback, right? That shouldn't be it. But if you should have solved it with either the right service protocol or the right inspection or whatever it is, then, and you have to go back before your next recurring appointment, then it's a callback. And what most of the CRMs struggle with is causation. Who caused the callback? And whether you pay on production or whether you pay hourly, you will have scenarios where technician A goes goes out and services a home. They do a really poor job of it. Customer calls back 2 weeks later and they say, hey, I saw him on the camera. He didn't even spray the perimeter of the house. I don't know what he was doing the whole time. And now technician A is homesick with the flu. And so they've got to send technician B back to that house to take care of that issue. And if that happens, traditionally what happens is technician B gets knocked on his callback rate because he's the one that performed the service for that callback. But he shouldn't, because he's not the one that caused that resurface. And if you're looking to change performance and change somebody's behaviors, you don't want to knock that person because they're just there because they had to be there. What you want to do is attribute it back to the person who caused that resurface. And so by looking at raw data, we're able to do that, which is really cool. But yeah, it's an incredibly important metric and ties into so many different things. And I don't want to go super far down this road because I'm a little bit of a data junkie, but you start to see like, hey, callback rate is high, then customer perception of your company is low, which means now reviews go low, which means that your lead flow diminishes, which means that there's all these pieces that you start to go down that road. And I like to tie things together that do actually have an impact on each other. So callback rate's an incredibly important one. It's why I put it at the top of that list, because some really minor things can modify those, like time on site, spending 2 or 3 more minutes doing one more cycle around the house, or communicating with the client what you actually did at the end of the appointment. So there's all kinds of things that you can do there, but I love identifying that on an individual basis and the causation basis.
Yeah, you bring up some really good points there about first creating context around these KPIs and the focus being on individuals, right? Because you can only hold someone accountable if you know what to hold them accountable to, and if they know what they're being held accountable to. And the more transparent, as a leader you are with your team about that data, the more feedback they get, going back to that real-time feedback that you were talking about that Driven provides, the better off your team is going to be. And the more empowered they are going to be to actually affect the metrics, the KPIs that they are being held accountable to, which is obviously so important for everything from morale, right? Making sure that your employees actually feel taken care of, feel like their voice is heard, feel like they're being rewarded when they're doing a good job, and also to not just feeling good, but like actual improvements in the business, because they know what they're supposed to be working on. Once you actually have those KPIs and you have a certain standard that you're trying to uphold, they know that standard that they're being held to. Anyways, some really, really powerful points there. Next, I want to jump into improving the callback rate. So what are some effective ways companies use to reduce their callback rate and, as a byproduct, improve customer satisfaction?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple of those, but a lot of it comes down, I love that you use the word empower, because traditionally it's been really hard to empower them, right? And Seth Garber is a good friend of mine at Pest Daily, and he's worth checking out if you haven't seen any of his content or what they do. But he talks a lot about this learn versus know concept. When they learn why they're doing what they're doing and what impact it has on the business, then now they finally can be empowered to take ownership. Like, I want your route to feel like it's your business. And when they start to feel those things, then of course they're going to take care of their clients better. And of course they're going to communicate with them and say, hey, this is what I am going to do for you. Then I'm going to go do it. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to say, this is what I did for you. And this is what I noticed. And so, you talk about things that change that. Communication with clients is so key and so important. I harped on my technicians all the time, like reach out to them, touch base with them. When you're on their way to their house, when you're at their house, when you're finished with their house, you want to feel like you have a relationship with the person that's coming into your home, into this intimate space of yours. And when you do, you trust them to take care of the issues. And then when they do see a spider crawling in the corner of their house, they're not going to call you because they know that you did a good job. There's just a spider, right? And they understand that, yeah, a spider can still come through into my home, even though my pest control company is doing an awesome job. And so that communication is super key. And then also just understanding what the job actually entails. We'll talk about completion, I think, here in a minute, but having them understand why they're doing the appointments they're doing and actually feeling like they need to complete those appointments, then changes the perception of everything, with the client, with the technician, with the company when they call in to talk to one of your CSRs, your office admins. I think it all comes down to that perception standpoint.
Yeah, perception, communication, expectations, all really, really important. Really, no matter what business you're running, right, with clients in general. Let's jump down to completion rate, which you just mentioned. What does completion rate mean in the context of pest control services, and why is it significant to track this by technician?
Yeah, this is a really cool one, and one that's been traditionally very hard to monitor. Most technicians think that they are completing 100% of their appointments. And not because they're doing them in the same day. And that's really a big shift, is that same day completion percentage. That's what we really harp on and focus on, is completing the appointments that were put on your schedule for today. But again, this is going to sound like I'm, hating on the CRMs a little bit, but the traditional format has been an appointment goes on the schedule, technician goes out to the appointment. If the technician can't complete it, either they or the CSR take that appointment and put it on another day. And what that does to completion percentage in most of the CRMs is makes it look like they completed 100% of those appointments, because now it's moved to another day. It's not missed, it's not closed out, it's just moved. And so now their day where it had 12 appointments now only has 11, and they completed 11 of 11. And so we do some trainings in all of the different CRMs about ways that they can do that better. Things like allocating a tag to that appointment, closing it, and then opening a new appointment for the next one, because it goes a long way and it starts to create this ownership of their route to say, hey, if I had 12 appointments and I only completed 11, what that means is that I didn't produce enough today to stay on track with my KPIs, if that's one of the KPIs that you track. It also means that now the next day, whenever that day is that they move that appointment to, now I have 13. And so I'm going to be able to spend less time at those homes, or I'm going to have to move somebody from that time to another. And so what we want to do is create, again, that ownership mentality where you get to a home and client says, hey, my dogs are in the back, I don't want you to service today. Where a not so great technician, or a technician that doesn't feel ownership of their route and wants to go hang out at 7-Eleven and watch The Office on their phone, can say, awesome, no big deal, I'll come back later. When a great technician is going to say, oh, no big deal, if you don't mind, just pull the dog in for a minute. And also, just FYI, all of the products that we use are pet friendly, and so we'd love to be able to take care of that for you, and it's not a big deal at all. And so you push through those minor objections that otherwise mess up the schedule. And the technician doesn't realize how much that affects the business until they can start to see that information and see how it all ties together.
That makes a lot of sense. And so you mentioned a couple things that leads well into my next question, which is, if a tech's completion rate is lower than average, what should business owners be looking for as potential root causes, right? So one is lack of training on how to handle certain situations. Two is laziness. Laziness probably not the root cause, right? But that might be the symptom of some underlying issue. And then third thing that we're going to keep probably coming back to, which is not feeling empowered, right? Not feeling ownership over their route. So is there anything else that an operator might be looking for as a potential root cause?
No, I think that's perfect. I think those three things cover most scenarios, right? And you're still going to have and I do this with all of our KPIs. I never say that you should have 100% or 0% on any of these things, right? There's always going to be variance. There's going to be a customer that says, hey, we're having a wedding in the back and I forgot, everybody's here, you can't come in today. And it's like, okay, I get that. I'm not going to force you to let me come in if it really doesn't make sense for you and you want what the customer wants at the end of the day. But you set the goal at 93% if that's your area, or you live in an area, or you're in the current season where it rains a lot and you're going to have constant issues. And so you want to lower the goal during those times to say, hey, right now it's probably more like 82% or 85%, and that's okay. And hitting 85% is 100% because that's the goal that I've set for you. And so it's really understanding what your business does and where you want it to be. And then those three things that you talked about, training up on those to get them to the point where they're hitting the goals that you've set for them.
Moving on to the third KPI, production per hour. And we talked about dissecting this by both branch and by tech. So help me understand, what is production per hour, right? Because that might actually be a foreign KPI to some people. And can you break down what this metric measures and how it impacts profitability?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually a unique one for me because in all of the time that I operated, I didn't track production on an individual level or pay based on production, which now that I'm more, networked into the rest of the industry, I'm realizing that probably 80% of the space pays based on production. And so I'm finding out a little bit more about that. But at its core, what that means is the contract value or the appointment value of all of the appointments that a technician completes in a day, right? And so if they complete 9 reservices or callbacks and 2 revenue generating appointments, they've probably only generated, $200 worth of production in that day. And so as you track production per hour, production per technician, you start to see these correlating things. And again, I'm going to come back to this probably a little bit as we work through them. I love how interconnected some of these KPIs are, because if you track production per hour and you see, hey, all of these technicians are generating $200, $300, $400, whatever it is per hour, and this technician generates $40, you know something's wrong. either you're scheduling him improperly or her, sorry, or they're doing something with their service protocols where they can't be servicing revenue produced appointments. And so I like being able to track that and allocate it back to an individual because you can see some really clear patterns in what they do and how they're doing it.
And since you have such, great insight into the industry at large at this point, can you give us an idea of what the range of a healthy production per hour is?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And I hate to throw a number on it because every area is going to be slightly different than another. But what I like to be able to do is to, and again, this is going to be, it's hard to throw a generic on it, right? Because every service type is a little bit different. But for us, I wanted my technicians to be able to complete 12 appointments a day, right? Like that was my range. And so you start to factor in like each of those appointments for us was worth anywhere from $90 to $120. And so I would hope that there's no more than one callback in a day. And so you can start to kind of do that math backwards, but it really depends on the individual client and what their pricing structure is and how that all works. And I have some unique thoughts about that. I'm a big fan of the monthly billing process instead of a service-based billing. And so that throws a little bit into that production model. Also, this is probably way too deep into the weeds, but some of the CRMs struggle with that monthly billing concept. And so they don't allocate the actual appointment value, the complete appointment value. They only allocate the monthly invoice to it. And so that one can be a little bit tricky to track, but it depends on the client. But I like to keep my callback rates below 3 to 4%. That's my goal in all of them. But if you're starting at 10%, then start at 10%. You don't need to be at 2% right now. Start at 10 and work to 8. Make 8 your goal now, then work to 6 and then work to 4 and work your way down. Yeah. I don't know if that really answers your question, but yeah, kind of a roundabout way.
It does, right? And then also you have different kinds of businesses, right? So are we talking about residential general pest control?
Right.
Or are we talking about another service line? And then, of course, route density plays a huge role in the range of what that production per hour is going to be, right? I mean, that was one of the most beautiful things about door to door is that you can go into a neighborhood, have incredible route density, production per hour can be excellent. And it's one of the biggest downsides of the work that we do in digital marketing because it's much more difficult to be that targeted. You're casting a wider net, usually across a city. And so, if you're doing that in a newer market, that means your production per hour is going to be low for a little while, right? While you try to build up that route density.
Yeah, for sure. And you're much more equipped to talk to this than me. But I love that, there's marketing tools that we can get a little bit more specific with. But I'm sure the problem that you guys see, and you probably want to wring their necks a little bit, is your clients want results and they want them now, right? If they could be patient and you could be targeted to a specific area or specific demographic, then yeah, you could come in and handle that. But we want volume and we want new clients and we want them now. So let's cast the net really wide and take in as much as we can get. So yeah, all of those things play into it. I met with a weed-based company. They do not marijuana, weed control.
Got it.
And they do a very different business than we do. It's the same concept, the same execution, but they operate differently, and their recurring model is a little bit different than ours. So yeah, I think it's a little bit unique to each client. But it comes back to the first question you asked: what's the most important thing? Is understanding how your business operates today, so that you can then identify where areas of opportunity are for tomorrow and what those next steps look like.
So let's do one more question related to this KPI. Is there a risk of focusing too heavily on production per hour, right? And so, and also, how can owners strike the right balance between efficiency and service quality?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a little bit of a product pitch maybe for us, but we've spent thousands of hours, analyzing data and looking at different, the ways different companies operate. Our tool only allows for 5 KPIs at a time to be displayed to any individual user. And we have tested that at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So 5 is the number that we chose because they can focus on 5 KPIs. If they have 6 or 7, they start to lose that focus and they can't, and it's just human nature. It's not like they're not as smart as we are or anything like that. But as there are more of them, they just have this tendency it becomes too broad and too vague. And so yes, I think you can focus too much on it, but as long as you tie pieces together, we have this pro score concept internally and driven that we allocate to every individual. And it's a weighted grade, just like in school, of how that individual is achieving across all 5 of their metrics. And so instead of saying like, you just need to achieve to these, if you achieve to 4 of them and you fail at 1, your pro score can't be a 90. or a 95 where you want them to be to hit their incentives. The reason for doing that is to be able to say, hey, you have to focus on 5 different things. And you can, like emotionally, mentally, you can focus on those 5. The priority is identify which 5 are most important to you. It doesn't have to be this, right? I think those are important, but what's important for your business might be 5 different things. We've built probably 16 to 18 different technician KPIs, 10 to 15 different CSR ones, and so on and so forth. They don't have to be these by any means, but identify what's most important to you. And if production per hour is one of them, then make sure that it ties and connects to the other 4 and make sure that they achieve to all of them. And so that they can't just leave one in the dust, because really you leave one of these behind, the company suffers in some way or another.
Yeah. And do you guys find yourself doing any kind of consulting for pest control companies who maybe want a little bit of education around like what KPIs should they prioritize among those 5? Because I would imagine you take on some clients who are not as savvy as others, right, when it comes to their KPIs and their data, and they may be incentivizing technicians, for example, in a way that is not ideal. So do you guys end up being able to kind of educate your clients and then walk them through what those 5 KPIs should be, and then how to give some kind of weighted balance to those KPIs, so that, if there's an incentive tied to a certain standard, that, they are optimizing that blended performance score?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And the answer is yes. We don't monetize that in any way, because that's not what we want to do. But we love that idea. And to answer your question, like they're not sophisticated, but they know that, most of them. And it's not a knock on them. They're really good at what they're good at, but they come in and they're like, what should we look at? How should we look at these things? And so yes is absolutely the answer to that. We love being part of that. There's also a lot of times where clients come in and they're like, we really want to track completion percentage. And we look at their data and it's all wrong. We can't really track it. And we can give feedback and we can say, if you did this, or if you changed this, then we can get cleaner data for you and we can be able to feed those back to you. So absolutely. We also find that those KPIs are ever changing. It doesn't mean that you have to choose 5 right now and those are your locked in 5 KPIs forever, because you may come in and completion percentage has been bad for a year and we get your service protocol under control and we figure out why those things are going on. You change those behaviors, you lead and manage to it, and now everybody is at 98%. It's like, okay, well, let's not look at that one for a bit. Everybody's maintained 98% for 6 months. We don't need to look at that. So let's pull that out, and now let's look at driving scores. Let's integrate with your GPS monitoring, and all of your drivers slam on their brakes all day long, and let's get that changed, and let's look at that and give them some feedback on what's going on. And actually we may talk about driving score, I don't know if we do, but yeah, there's just some really cool things that you can plug and play and shift and change, and I think it's that willingness to be able to look at yourself. We a lot of times have people come to us and say, we're doing a great job, our technicians are awesome, we don't really need this. I'm like, that's awesome, that's so cool for you. Let me just show you though. Let's look at it and see. And even if they're doing awesome, maybe they're at 5% callback rate, but you're doing an awesome job. What if we eliminated and dropped that down to 4% or 3%? What could that do for the company as a whole? And so there's just always opportunities for growth and for change. And we like working most with those that are willing to see those and want progress.
No business is perfect, right? There's always
mine included, for sure.
Yeah, right. I mean, all of us, but Pesty, we have a long way to go. Our intention and what we work on every day is to be the absolute, by a magnitude of order, the best in the world at what we do. Everyone on the team has that directive. If you're going to be the best in the world at what you do, and that is your mission, or you just want to be great, you're always having to, take things further, make improvements. In part because that's just the vision that you've laid out, right? For your own sake, because that's what's important to you. And also because for the sake of the health of the business, right? Your competition's not going to slow down. Competition's not going to be getting worse. Terminix is not twiddling their thumbs, just sitting around staying the same. There is no stagnation, right? And so even if you're doing great, if you can make things better, then why not? It's also more fun. Like, I just find that striving for greatness is just so much more fun than settling for anything.
Yeah, 100% right there with you.
So the 4th KPI we are going to focus on is phone call answer rate. Phone call answer rate is, we might call like an unsexy KPI, but it's so critical. So why is this metric such a game changer for pest control businesses?
Yeah. And I have the feeling that you and I probably are really aligned on this one, because it's a direct result of your marketing spend, right? In most scenarios. And what I'm going to talk about for answer rate is more from a new client perspective. Obviously, answer rate is going to be super important from existing clients, because you want to make sure you're taking care of them. But answer rate's so important because how much money, and obviously I'm not asking this really, it's a rhetorical question, but how much are they spending cost per click, right? Like your cost per click on a marketing campaign is not cheap. And then your conversion customer acquisition cost to even get them to call you is even higher than that cost per click. And so you've spent all this money, you've spent all this time getting people to find out about you, getting people to go to your site, and then finally clicking that stupid call button. And if they call you and you don't answer, they're most of the time gone. They're moving on to somebody else. And I do it. I'm a consumer. I do the exact same thing. If I call someone and they don't answer me, I'm going to call the next person on the list. And I'm just going to keep going through until I find somebody that I like or that fits my price point or whatever it is. You're shooting yourself in the foot if you're not even answering the call to begin with. So that's why it's so important. And it's usually one that you can get under control pretty well when you start tracking the data. I had teams for a long time that were answering like 40% of my calls. I'm like, I am wasting thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars every month for nothing. That we don't even have a chance at closing. I can't talk to you about close rate or your sales ability or anything until we actually answer the phone. And then we can maybe go from there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this one is close to my heart and painful. Painful when we discover that phone call answer rate is, lower than we would like to see it. And we typically use CallRail as a phone tracking and form tracking measurement tool. And it kind of brings all that data into that dashboard. And phone call answer rate is absolutely something to look at, and it is critical. To your point, if you are not answering the phone, and I find that this is typically problems, like much bigger problem with solo operators, which is why we don't work with solo operators and companies doing less than $1 million per year, is because I just know how much money, how expensive it's going to be for them to acquire customers that we're going to bring them, because when they're in the field and taking care of things and that phone doesn't get answered, it is expensive. It's an expensive mistake, and we hate to see it. So what operational changes have you seen companies make to improve their phone call answer rate?
Yeah. So I'm going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse here, but it really just comes down to access to the data. When they see how they're doing and they're monitored, and that performance is monitored, it's not a big brother mentality. It's just this is how you're actually doing, and this is what I expect of you. And so when they see that, they're like, oh no, I can't play video games, or I can't scroll through Instagram or whatever it is while these calls are coming in. And even to the extent that we track things, and these are sometimes connected to that answer rate, we can track things like average hold times or average talk times. And it's wild how interconnected these pieces are, because sometimes you'll have a CSR that wants to talk to every client and you love that, but they miss calls because of it. And so you need to find that perfect balance. It's like, hey, your average talk time is 6 minutes. Everybody else's is 2.5. And so I love that you have a great relationship, but let's maybe find some middle ground. Everyone else should be at 4 and you should be at 4.5. And let's get to there. And if you do that, that opens 1.5 minutes of wait time that you can then answer 4 more calls throughout the day. And you can start to see those correlative effect. And if you can answer 4 more calls and you only got 30 calls, now your answer rate goes up pretty dramatically. And so it's just really understanding the why and what that affects and how it impacts the business.
And I'll give a little bit of context here to give you a range, right? Because busy season is going to be different than
for sure
low season. What would be healthy ranges, or what kind of standard do you normally see pest control companies make during the different seasons for answer rate?
Yeah, if it's like GPC, so because again, we work with a bunch of different types of clients, right? And so there's some commercial that have way less calls, right? They get literally the guy I talked to today has 8,000 clients, and he's like, we get 4 or 5 calls a day. I'm like, wow, that's insane. And you must have an awesome protocol, because their clients just don't care to reach out to them. And I would love to have clients like that. So yeah, it depends a little bit, but in GPC, like for my business, I wanted like a 95% answer rate. I was like, if a call comes through, even if you have to put somebody else on hold for a minute, do it, because I want somebody to answer. And if they can't, it means that I'm not staffed well enough, because you start to do that math again. And this is obviously dependent on each client and you guys as the marketing company. But if you can go in and say every call that I get is worth $50 or $100, then is that worth hiring another CSR to be able to make sure that those calls get answered? If you're missing 10 calls a day and you convert at a 60% rate or 50% rate, those 5 calls that you could have converted, I promise you they outweigh the cost of that CSR. And so it all just comes down to the specific client and how they use it. But I'm a big fan of having really high answer rates because I can usually offset that cost in the client value that you're going to get.
Music's my ears, and I love that you gave some highly tactical advice there in how to think about how to speak about answer rate. We are going to close, no pun intended, with the close rate as the 5th KPI. So close rate is often talked about in sales at large, right? But how does it translate specifically in the pest control industry?
Yeah. So it really, and every company should do this. I'm a huge advocate of this. Like everybody in your company should be taught to sell, right? There's no role in the organization that shouldn't be selling. Technicians should constantly be selling. They are maybe the best at selling when you train them right. CSRs should be selling. Obviously, salespeople should be selling. And so you're gonna have different close rates across that. But essentially, and it's not tracked very well in most companies, but it comes down to, is there a lead? Is there an opportunity for you to sell someone? And did you turn that opportunity into a revenue producing client, right? And so that could be you talk to customer who's already an existing customer about exclusion work because you noticed something in their house as you were going through it. That should be entered as a lead into the system that you track, whatever system that is. All of the CRMs have a lead function in there. And did you take that opportunity and did you convert it into something that generated revenue? So at its core, that's really what it is.
And talking specifically about GPC, and I think probably most people know what we've been talking about when we say GPC, but general pest control. What would you like to see as a good close rate? I'm gonna give a lot of context here for GPC and for raw leads, right? So not necessarily qualified leads. Maybe you want to go there as well, but I'd be curious what your expectation would be. And let's also give you more context from, inbound marketing efforts, right? So like SEO, PPC, like flyers, like just a general high level number.
And this is a little bit of a clarification. I don't really love the qualified leads in the pest control space. I like them in software. And anyways, I won't go too far down into that road, but I think if it's a lead, it's a lead in pest control. And you should have done a good enough job in your marketing to make it a qualified lead before they even call. They should have had the information that they need to at least pique their interest, and they're calling you for a good reason, right? You're not a general pest control offering and they're calling you for bird removal if you don't do that, right? Like that shouldn't even have come through the door. So I generally eliminate those. But anyways, I always thought from that perspective that we wanted to be at 40%. And every company is going to be a little bit different that way. But if we were at 40% plus, I felt like we were doing our job fairly well from those types of leads, from marketing-based leads.
Yep. And that lines up with my experience and expectation as well. In my experience, clients who are doing a poor job with their close rate might be 30%. That could also be affected by things like price. Like if you're more expensive than everyone else, maybe you expect to close fewer. But generally speaking, if you're at about 30%, it's usually a sign that some things need to, definitely need to be worked on. And then on the high end, and I actually just had one of my clients come on the pod. This was a few episodes ago in December, and she talked about the transformation that she brought her sales department through, and they are at about a 50% raw lead.
Incredible.
Close rate. Yeah. That was really...
And if you go back to what we were talking about before, if you look at answer rate and your close rate is 50%, then it's even more important that you answer those calls. That's why all of these things are so interconnected, because they really do end up making a massive impact. You've already spent the money with your marketing agency. You've already staffed your office. It means nothing more to your cost structure if you just answer 3 more calls. There's no difference to what you're spending right now. You just have to answer the phone, and then you work on close rate and you teach sales tactics and all these other things. But yeah, I think that's an awesome number and incredible that they're hitting 50%.
Yeah, really, really incredible. And I asked that they come on the pod and talk about it because we listen to these calls. We want to make sure that our clients have someone, and I'll give a couple tips here on improving the close rate. Right, that person on the phone needs to sound friendly. They need to sound like they actually want to be doing their job, like they actually want to be taking that call. I'm surprised at how not friendly, a lot of inside sales teams can sound, right? Bad day, bad time, tired, whatever it is. It all comes out. It matters. It really affects. Training on handling objections is a huge one. There's no training on handling all the objections that you're going to get. And there's not that many, so training on how to handle them is big. Elizabeth, who was from the client that we had on the pod, and something that I learned was super critical to their success was separating their customer service team from their inside sales team. Most pest control companies, in my experience, that's one and the same. They don't have a CSR team and then a inside sales team. And those are very different skills. and different personalities. Someone who's really good at customer service really might not want to be doing sales. And so no matter how much training you try to put them through, it might just be trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. And then the fourth tip would be to your point, to make sure that, marketing is aligned with what you're trying to accomplish. Inevitably, some, bad leads are going to slip through, but
naturally.
Right. But in general, like the leads you should be getting most of them, meaning like 90% of them plus, should be qualified. They should be leads that you have an opportunity to like really actually close. And the language that is used by marketing and sales needs to be aligned, because if there's a lack of continuity there, then that friction is going to come out in that conversation. The example that I will sometimes see is if we're running an offer, some kind of discount on the initial service, $20 off, $50 off, or a specific price point, whatever it is, and your sales team is not aware of the offers that are available out there, that's a problem, because prospect calls in asking about the offer. Inside sales team, customer service team goes, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't have any offers. You've lost that sale. So making sure that you have those four things in line can make a big difference. That closes out the 5 KPIs. And Adam, we've taken up over an hour of your time here. Do you have a few more minutes or?
Yeah, you're great.
All right, awesome. I appreciate it. I'm sure the audience does too. This is just like one gold nugget after another. I'm also a data nerd, so this is great. Super having fun here. So we'll just do a couple more questions. What challenges do companies typically face when implementing KPI tracking, and how can they overcome them? You alluded earlier to data being either like disjointed or on paper. What are some of the common, pitfalls or things that you run into where people need to or these operators need to get their ducks, in a row before you can really dig into that data and actually make it useful?
Yeah, I would say that either the data is too hard to get to or it's wrong, because the second you start using incorrect data, all that trust goes out the window. And so if you come and you present to your technician and you say, hey, this is what I've seen you're doing, and technician can, with validity, because they're going to come back either way, but come back at you and say, no, that's not how I've been doing. Let's look at the data. This is actually how I've been performing. Then you immediately lose that credibility in what you're doing. And so having accurate data, I always say garbage in is garbage out. So you've got to figure out a way to get clean and accurate data. And that's the first step. And I've had potential clients that I've said, it's not the right time for us to work together because I want you to do X, Y, and Z. And if you do, then 100%, let's do this and we'll work to change your business and help you grow. But until you get to that point, we're not going to be able to be the right fit for you. And so having accurate data is super key to that. And then also just the biggest barrier is going to be that time. And hopefully we can be the solve for that. We're not going to be for every person, right? So I'm not that sales guy by any means, but that time spent in collecting the data is usually the biggest hurdle to people actually using, because it just takes too much time and too much effort for them to find it.
Who is the ideal client for Driven? What does that ideal client profile look like for anyone who's listening and wondering, is Driven for me?
Yeah. So this is going to sound like a sales pitch, and it really truly isn't. But when we first built Driven, we thought that we were going to fit for companies from 10 employees to like 100 employees. Like that was our like sweet spot, right? We thought that it was going to be there, and maybe even less than 100. We probably thought it was more like 50. Like somewhere in that space. But we found, and most of it is we thought either the small operators are going to have the tools that we can pull the data from, and the big operators are going to have internal solutions already built. And anyone 50 or 100 employees plus is going to have a really cool tool that already does what we do, and we're not going to fit. What we found is that's just not true on either end of the spectrum. There are some really cool software providers out there that have made it accessible to use really cool tools at a small level. So we work with, literally, we have a client that is himself. He is a solo operator and uses us because we make access to his data so much easier. So we work with them. And then we also work with some of the platforms under NSC Mix. And so we work from this crazy small scale all the way up to one of the biggest players in the world, let alone in our country, because they just haven't figured this out. And that's not a knock again. It's just purely the tools haven't been available for them to do it. And so it's been a huge undertaking for us to be able to understand the difference between a one-man operation and one that has 700 employees, because they're totally different in the way that they do things. But it's also really cool to see the similarities, because that 700-man operation still has a technician that goes to a home, that interacts with the client that does these same kind of things. So really, we thought that it was going to be smaller. Now we've worked with, across the board. So for us, it really comes down to, do they want to understand their data? Do they have the tools that we can even pull from? Because we have had some people that run a 20-man operation and barely have a CRM, and it's Jobber. And, it's like these random tools that don't really work very clear cut with what we do. But outside of that, if they have the tools, they want to understand their data, we can work with them.
I really appreciate that that's the case, because I wish we could work with solo operators with the way we do things. And at some point I would like to, a lot of the reason that we create the content that we do is that we want to educate those operators so they can scale, so that we can help them properly. And the fact that you guys can play a part in helping the smaller operators, the smaller companies scale, get to that $1 million plus mark is huge. So guys, if you're listening, if you're a solo operator, small operation, all the way up to the big guys, make sure you reach out to Driven and at least have a conversation. See if the data that you have is useful. Try to dig in and really figure out, is it accurate? Is there something I can do with it? And what KPIs, what are those 5 KPIs that I want to be paying attention to at this stage of where my company is? Adam, I really appreciate your time. Like I said, just absolute gold. I'm so excited to hit publish and make sure that as many people as possible listen to this, because this was really great.
Well, no, I appreciate you having me on. I love what you guys do and how you're doing it. And yeah, happy to be here and happy to share what I can.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam.
Yep.